Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for today's episode of the Go for Leadership podcast. My guest today is Gianpaolo Fava.
Go for Leadership interviews.
Gian, nice to meet you and welcome to the show.
Hi, Daniel. Nice talking to you, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. And like always, it would be great if you can give my audience a quick introduction of yourself.
Sure. So where do we start? On the personal side, I'm originally from Venezuela, mixed parents. So my mom is Colombian, my dad is Italian. I studied international relations, and then I moved to Spain to study business. And I started working here. I had done some work previously in Venezuela, but nothing major. And here I started working in sales, then moved to marketing, then to program management, then to strategy. And now I'm leading the innovation and automation team globally for midmarket at SAP.
Awesome. And I think we share one combined passion, which is leadership. So I'm very curious to learn from you. How would you define leadership, or what does leadership mean to you?
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept, right? And I think my definition of leadership has evolved with me. Before, I used to think a leader was someone who had a team of people under him or her. And I've realized that's not true. So leadership to me means someone that is able to help others grow and perform to their best possible.
I like that because it reflects also my strong belief. And maybe you can also outline a little bit, as you're also performing a podcast show in Spanish. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the podcast all about, how you started, why you have started, so that also here our listeners can understand better.
Absolutely. So yes, I'm also a part-time podcaster. My podcast is called Conocimiento Tribal. It's for Spanish speakers who are interested in leadership topics as well, right? And it all started with a conversation with two friends during the pandemic. One of those, I live in Barcelona, Spain. So one of those times where we were allowed to go out after the lockup, and we were just having a glass of wine and having an interesting conversation. And I said to them, do you know how lucky we are of knowing the people we know, having access to the resources we have from our companies, being able to learn every day from other people with very high qualifications and studies. And after that phrase, I asked myself, how can I contribute, even if it's a tiny bit, to others accessing this type of information as well? And the idea of a podcast came to mind. So I started the podcast interviewing leaders around the globe, both from SAP and outside the company as well. And then I moved to a shorter format of 10 minutes where I just gave peels of knowledge on different topics around leadership. It's very interesting what you find interviewing people, because I think some are more people-oriented, some are more business-oriented. Some have this coach attitude. Some others have the mentor attitude, a bit more developed. But overall, they all end up talking about the same things in different words. I think they all talk about self-management and self-awareness. They all talk about understanding the differences within the people that you lead, whether they are direct reports or not. And they all talk about having a clear purpose that you can share with your team and they relate to.
I think that too. I totally agree. I mean, we are now approaching the 50th episode of our show, and there are a lot of similarities, and as you said, different words. maybe you can share a little bit about the experience that you have had interviewing your guests, and maybe some highlights and some lowlights that you have learned of leadership, let's say, or leadership experienced people.
So I remember Daniel Tetenawa. He's one of the vice presidents here at SAP. When I was interviewing him, we were talking about self-management, and he said, Gian, when I was in university, I had this professor that came to us and said, I need to schedule the time with my family in my agenda. And I thought, what? Do you really need to schedule time with your family? I mean, who does that? Well, 30 years later, here I am scheduling dinners with my wife in the agenda. So I kind of had to bite my own tongue. And the reason why I'm doing it and what I learned is now every time I put something in my calendar, it means I'm fully focused on what it is that I have dedicated and agreed to dedicate my time to. So if I'm going to have a dinner with my wife, phone goes away, I'm not available for anyone else but my wife. If I'm sitting in a meeting room having an interview with you, then this is what I'm doing. I'm not focused on anything else. And I really like that because it talks about our need today to focus on not multitasking, but the opposite, right? One tasking. The what it is that we're doing right now. And I think it's a concept that many leaders have lost because they want to be managing everything at the same time and knowing what is happening all around them. But the reality is numbers show your productivity, the perception of other people of you, it goes down. It's not a good perception. So it's much better to really focus and pay attention to that one thing. People will appreciate it and you will have better productivity. So yeah, that was one thing I remember that really caught my attention.
No, perfect. And I can agree as well. So I also schedule appointments with my family, which helps also to structure your day and, as you said, right, to be focused. So what was maybe also an episode where you said, "Wow, that's a great." I would say a great view of or perspective of leadership, or maybe a learning as well that you have taken from of the episodes.
I interviewed the Spanish president of the Emotional Intelligence Association. He's a psychologist. And to me, emotional intelligence is a concept that any leader needs to understand and work on, right? And I'm sure people listening to this podcast probably know what it is, but for those who don't, emotional intelligence, it's about, as I said before, self-awareness. With self-awareness comes the ability to self-manage, but it's also about empathy to others. And when we were having the conversation around emotional intelligence, I asked the question, so how often do you see leaders or managers with high emotional intelligence? And he said, it's not that frequent, actually. And I see people trying to do stuff to connect with their teams and with their stakeholders. The problem is they're lacking that first step, which is self-awareness, right? So they're trying to change things without knowing what it is that they really need to change. So what I always recommend to them is to first start with them and then with their environment. because it's much easier to change yourself than it is to change your environment, right? And one thing should lead to the other. So I for anyone that is really interested in leadership and becoming the best they can be, I think I would share that recommendation that he gave to sit down and understand, okay, what is my perception of myself? And then try to go into someone else's shoes, someone that you work with maybe, and say, okay, what is Daniel's perception of me?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a gap between my perception and Daniel's perception? And why is that? And that really opens up the door to understanding not just the image that you want to portray, but the image that others are perceiving. If you are a bit more risky, you can even ask people, right? So, what do you think about me? Openly.
Mm-hmm.
What could I improve? What are some challenges that you see I might have and I need to work on? Those conversations are crucial if you really want to evolve as a leader, I think.
Awesome. Let's maybe switch gears a little bit. So I think both of us also share the passion of education. That's also a purpose that we follow with our podcast. Yes. So in your view, how are companies or the educational system of our countries prepare people for such roles? Because leadership roles in general are very influential, very powerful. And I agree to the statistics, even if they are not published, that there are a lot of missing, let's say, emotional intelligence at leaders. So, maybe your view, I would be very interested to hear your view on how we can, if it can be learned at all, or how we can prepare leaders for such very, powerful roles in future.
So I'll start with that last question, if you don't mind. I do think it can be learned. I'm a huge promoter of the growth mentality, and it's been proven over and over that people with a growth mentality, they quickly learn new things. They overcome problems faster than the people that have a closed mindset or mentality. And even since an early stage, there was a study where they took two groups of kids, and to one group, they gave, to both groups, they gave a math problem. And it was a problem that they could solve, but they weren't trained before on how to solve that specific problem. To one group, they said, you can do it. You just need to put the effort. Don't worry, there's enough time, blah, blah, blah. The other group, they have already identified as people that were very good, but got frustrated often. They often said, we haven't learned this, so I don't know how to solve it, etc. So it was really that close mindset. And they also told them, this is something that you haven't learned yet, so maybe you won't be able to solve it, etc. So there was some preconditioning as well. What they found out is the group that had a growth mindset and that they have encouraged to solve the problem, it took them 4 hours to come to a solution, but they found out what the solution was. The other group got frustrated just after half an hour. And they said, no, we can't solve it, period. And they didn't even keep trying, right? So I think that quick exercise with kids shows that if you have a growth mindset, you can become a leader. Now, talking about companies and how we could promote that. I think there are different ways. I had a manager in sales that told me sometimes we lose a great sales executive and we win a bad manager. And that is so true because we've had the tendency across years to believe a good leader is someone who was a good expert in their field. And one has nothing to do with the other, right? Because you somehow need people skills, emotional intelligence to become a great leader. and to be an expert, not necessarily maybe you have a great IQ, and you know how to do the thing that you do very well. Some companies are doing trainings and evaluations as part of the growth within their company. So if you want to become a manager, you need to attend the training and you need to pass the training. If you don't pass the training, you cannot become a manager in the company. So that is a very, I would say, close, hard approach on who becomes a leader and who doesn't, but at least they guarantee that people go through a training, right? Which is what I like. Specifically in SAP, we have some academies internally that people, it's optional to attend, or you can be invited by your manager to attend if you are seen as someone with high growth potential within the company. And within these trainings, not only you learn a bit more about the business, but you also learn about people management, emotional intelligence, how to self-manage. I think it's important, and not many companies do. We provide open coaching, and I think, I don't know if I have talked to you about this, but sorry, I have what I call PSG, personal support group, for any professional. I think everyone should have this. It's one mentor, one coach, and one executive sponsor. Those three people will really help you in your career in different ways. What can you do as a company to promote people growing to be a leader? Have them sit with a coach and have them sit with a mentor who's already a leader. And those two interactions will provide them with a lot of different views and knowledge on what they need to do, what they need to learn to become a leader. Sorry, long answer, Daniel, but I hope.
No, I like that. Also like the way how you described, let's say, the systematics and also the different angles of support, because I think you can be, of course, prepared in theory, but when you are the first time in a leadership position, it feels completely different, right? And you may be facing with problems or challenges that you have not been able to be trained, right? I mean, maybe a war situation that we are in, maybe a pandemic that we are in, maybe also personal problems of your staff that you have not been trained of, that are part of our responsibility as well in certain way as leaders. So I like that a lot, and I think, or at least I can imagine that this is a very fruitful way to prepare people, not leaving them alone in such roles, right? To promote and then say, well, now figure it out by yourself, to be fair. So one question, of course, that I'm also very interested in is you started as well to talk about specific topics in that has to do with leadership in your podcast. And what would be interesting for me is how do you pick a topic, how you prepare the topic, and how do you reflect on those topics before you record the session, so to speak?
I'm a very curious person by nature, Daniel. I think you are as well. And I'm subscribed to several different channels, podcast, Harvard Business Review, etc. And nowadays, it's very easy for you to get bombarded with information. You just need to choose whether you get bombarded by good information or bad information, right? So I try to get bombarded by good information. So I read a lot and I listen to different podcasts, and sometimes someone says something or I read something that I think this actually I think would be very helpful for people to know and dig a little bit deeper on the topic. Or sometimes it's just an experience I went through that specific week, and I think a lot of people go through this as well. So maybe I can share how I go up around this situation. So once I identify the topic, and again, it can come from different sources. If it's something that I know about, then I just try to organize my thoughts on a paper and try to say from a context perspective what it is that I want to say, then from the concept perspective as well. So if we're talking about emotional intelligence, what is emotional intelligence, right? That a lot of people don't know. Or if we're talking about mindfulness or coaching or mentorship. And after that, what are some quick tips? What are some quick actions that you can take to begin your path to master that skill? And I think it's important for people to remember we're in a path to mastery, and mastery takes a long time, especially with personal skills. So I would encourage everyone to not feel frustrated if after 1 month, 2 months, they haven't improved on a certain skill. Sometimes it takes years. And to me, what's important is to have the resilience to keep trying, to have the curiosity to keep learning, and to also recognize that you're human, right? And it might take some time, and setting those right expectations with yourself can help you get there much faster.
I like that. I call it snackable content because in the company that I'm currently working for, I introduced a learning experience, so to speak. I called it University, where I introduced snackable content, because you need to, if you have a 1 day or 2 day full training, it costs you a lot of money, it costs you a lot of time. The results maybe are not always the one that you expect. So I said maybe better to find a slot, a small slot in the week to have focus, and as we said earlier, focus half an hour on one specific topic, prepare it well, go into that topic very deeply, so that everybody takes even maybe a little bit for the next week to change or to work at. So, and this is a good move to my last question, Gian. When you started your career, or with the view of now, what have been the recommendation or the advice you would have given the younger Gian when he started his career?
I think I would say to myself to try as many things as possible and not be afraid to fail. It is so important for people to, because we don't know what we don't know, right? So to try different things. And whenever I have a young student in the company come to me for mentorship about their careers specifically, the first thing I ask them is, do you know what you don't like? Because it's much easier to know what you don't like than what you like, right? But if you know what you don't like, you already have a huge part of the process done. And the only way you can know what you don't like is by experiencing different things. So definitely that's something that I would recommend myself, and also anyone listening. Just try. What's the worst thing that can happen, right? Don't be afraid to fail.
Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
I liked it. Gian, thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Daniel. Pleasure being here with you.
Go for Leadership, the podcast.